My name's Les Turnbull, and this talk was going to be about railways in the Lemington area. My background is as a history graduate, spent most of my time in the education services, and upon retirement became very interested in the history of early railways and in mining in the area. The picture that we see in front of us is the picture of the early morning train from North Wylam to Newcastle, passing the pyramid of the Percy Pit of Walbottle and Colliery. And this is a reminder that Lemington once was important for both its railways and its mining. The train is on the North Wylam loop line, which, as you can see on the map in front of you, was a railway connecting Scotswood with Wylam and the Newcastle to Carlisle railway line. The pictures on the bottom show scenes from the early years of the railway, which was a very busy commuter line. One of the stations on the line was Heading on the Wall, which was some distance from the village. And these are photographs which I took in the summer holidays of 1957, and it shows you the line in action. North Wylam Station, now all signs of this have disappeared. It is now a car park, but it was once a busy commuter line and also a relief line for the Newcastle and Carlisle railway. What many people remember of Wylam, though, is the earlier existence of the railway as the wagonway from Wylam Colliery. And two of its locomotives, Puffing Billy and Wylam Dilly, both built before George Stephenson built any locomotives, are now preserved, one at the Science Museum in London and the other in Edinburgh. The mine belonged to Christopher Blackett, and his engineers were William Headley and Timothy Hackworth. And these men were all very important in the early years of the development of the steam locomotive. But this area is rich with other engineers. And I've listed some of the names along the bottom there, such as Stephenson, Hawthorne, who were well known. Armstrong, not the famous Lord Armstrong, but another Armstrong, an important family that lived in the Newburn-Lemington area. In the 18th century, though, there was an equally important group of engineers centered upon the Brown family of Throckley, Christopher Bedlington, and Richard Peck of Newbiggin Hall. And it's this group of engineers that we'll be looking at later. I mean, for example, did you know that there is a Newburn House in Swindon, the headquarters of the Great Western Railway? It belonged to the Armstrong family of Newburn-on-Tyne, who were friends of the Stephensons and the Hawthorns. And Joseph Armstrong became the locomotive and carriage and wagon superintendent of the Great Western Railway, and his brother was a local motor superintendent of the Northern Division of the Great Western Railway. This just serves to emphasize how engineers from this area left the area and developed railways elsewhere in the country, in Europe and the wider world beyond. We mustn't forget that besides the railways on the surface, there was an extensive network of underground railways within the mines. These were using horses as their mode of power. And this watercolour by Thomas Hare of the scene underground at Walbottle Colliery is typical of the whole region. We're going to go back, though, to a much earlier stage of the Wylam Railway. The stage before Christopher Blackett built his line and operated with steam locomotives. This was the horse-drawn wagonway built by William Brown in the 1750s. And here we have an illustration of it by the Swiss artist William Grimm. And perhaps you can see the spire of Wrighton Church on the other side of the river, on the left-hand side of the picture. These wagonways were operated entirely by horses, although they did use gravity power on the downhill sections. Many will be surprised at the extent of railways in the Northumberland and Durham area during the 18th century. And this is a section of a larger map of the coalfield, which shows the range of wagonways linking the various collieries to the north of Lemington with the staiths on the riverfront at what became known as the Gut. Looking more closely at the Gut with the benefit of the map by Isaac Thompson, which was published in 1767 for the Duke of Northumberland, we see three railways converging upon Lemington. The first one is William Brown's line from Throckley Colliery, which terminates at the staith in the bottom right-hand corner, where you will notice there is what is known as an on-gate to bring the wagons onto the staith and an off-gate leading from it. The second wagonway is from Hollywell Rains, which is roughly where Cow's nursery is today. And the third wagonway is the well-known Wylam wagonway. Now, both the second and the third wagonway went to staiths on Montague's land in Denton, which is why they appear to finish in no man's land on the right-hand side. Let's start by looking at the Throckley wagonway from this map of 1755. The wagonway had in fact been built in 1751 to take coal from William Brown's collieries to the Staithes at Lemington. And this is a map which he drew to submit a proposal for a change in the route of the wagonway to the Duke of Northumberland. What we're looking at here is the centre of the old village of Throckley. The military way is running across the top of the map, and the various pits are marked by what look like goalposts, and these are in fact horse chains, and you can see the wagonways marked with the wagons on it. So this is the first wagonway to come to Lemington. The original route of the wagonway is marked by these blue dots to the south of the what was then the newly built military way between Newcastle and Carlisle. And what William Brown was after was a change in the routing of the wagonway, partly because he was bringing into service new pits and new branches to the wagonway, but also because on the right-hand side there, the wagonway dropped very steeply from the military way down to the bottom right-hand corner, and this caused a great deal of disruption to traffic because of wagons running out of control. And what he was after was to reroute the wagonway along the red lines there, which would lessen the incline, and also to introduce a new branch from the colliery at Heddon, which was opening up at this time. In the late 1760s, the Duke of Northumberland was developing his colliery at Walbottle. And if we look at the top right-hand corner, we can see the railway from Throckley swinging down towards the bridge across the Walbottle Dean in the bottom left-hand corner. This map from the Society of Antiquaries collection shows the early stages of Walbottle Colliery, with the sinking of the Ann pit roughly in the centre of the map, and the very important engine pit, which housed a Newcomen engine for pumping. Perhaps also you can see the aqueduct, which is diverting water from the Walbottle Dean across another bridge towards the reservoir, roughly in the centre of the slide. The Ann pit became a branch of the Throckley wagonway, and because of this development, the whole wagonway was redesigned. Now, fortunately, the Duke of Northumberland made a survey of the railway in 1771, and this survives in the Society of Antiquaries collection. What we're going to do in the next few slides is have a close look at this wagonway in detail. The first thing I would wish to point out is that this was a very complex railway. And we're looking here at the northern end of the Duke's railway, with the Ann pit in the left-hand corner and the newly sunk Betty pit in the right-hand corner. And without going into it in any great detail, you can see that this isn't a simple railway. It is a very complex collection of mainline, branch lines, and sidings, serving the Betty pit, the engine pit, and the Ann pit. If we just move a little further and look at detail of this wagonway, the first point I would like to make is that the main way, which was where the loaded wagons were carried, consisted of what was known as a double rail. Now, this was one rail on top of another. And we're very fortunate to have in the Mining Institute an illustration of how these double railways were built, with one line on top of another. But incredibly, within about 100 years, within about 100 yards of where this sketch by the engineer John Buddle was made at Wallsend, the excavations at the Neptune Yard in 2013 uncovered a section of the main way. And if you look above the ranging rods, you'll see the well-preserved bottom rail sitting on the sleepers, but also the top rail sitting above that. This is much deteriorated, as you can see, but it is the only example ever to have been found of a main way. So the main way then was well engineered with the double rail embankments and cuttings, as we shall see. The byway, which was used to carry the empty wagons back to the colliery, was much more lightly engineered. It was a single rail and it had shallow cuttings. And this is a photograph of the excavation in 1997 of the wagonway at the Lambton D colliery in County Durham. And besides showing the byway, it also shows what were known as the false rails or the guide rails to prevent the wagons coming off the rail at sharp turns. Now, if we just move a little further down the wagonway to the bridge across the Walbottle Dean, you'll see from the bottom picture that there were in fact two railway bridges at Walbottle. One, the very large wooden bridge with 23 trestles carrying the wagonway from one side of the Dean to the other, from the Ann pit. And then a different type of bridge, the earthen bridge, which was carrying the branch line from the Betty pit to join up with the main way. Now, this was a familiar form of construction on the early railways. A culvert was constructed over the stream and an earth embankment erected on top of it. The famous one is the great embankment on the Tanfield Railway, which still carries the heritage line of today, and is much more significant than the Tanfield Arch. Just moving a short distance, having crossed the Walbottle Dean, we come to a really interesting feature on the railway, which is the wash hole. The top line is the main way, the bottom line is the byway, and it was customary for wagons to be led through the wash hole on their return journey. The illustration on the bottom there shows, which was drawn for the Neptune excavation, shows the loaded wagon moving by the force of gravity down to the Staith, as it would have done at Walbottle, and the empty wagon coming up on the byway through the wash pond on its way back to the colliery. Now, at the excavation in 2013, the wash pool was discovered at the Neptune yard, and after a heavy shower of rain, it was still performing its function in the 20th century that it had done in the 18th century. And if you bear in mind the illustration we've just seen, this is looking along the byway. The rails that you see are the prominent rails are the guide rails, and the cobbled area for the horse to walk along and keep dry, and the actual rails that the wagon ran on are submerged beneath the water. Now, moving towards the Staith, the top line is the main way and the bottom line is the returning byway, and we run through Lemington, through Newburn and Lemington to the Staiths. And the main way leads to the Throckley Staith at the bottom there, and also just above it to the little spout, the Staith for the Duke of Northumberland's colliery, just a little further to the north. And the lightly coloured line is the off gate and the returning byway. Now, it's important to realise that these staiths were extensive structures. I haven't a picture of the Throckley Staith, but fortunately a picture of the neighbouring Staith for Holywell survives in the form of a billhead for the colliery. And you can see the massive wooden structure of the Staith in the background, and one of the Tyneside keels about to depart on its journey, some 12 or so mile upriver to the waiting seagoing vessels at North Shields. Now, the Staith performed the important function of storing coal and preventing it from weathering, because when the coal weathered, its price was reduced on the market at principally London, and this was something which you didn't want to happen. So it was stored under cover at the Staiths, awaiting transport down to principally to London and the south east. Now, the wagonway from Walbottle and Throckley was extended in the 1770s further north to the direction of Callerton. Callerton, you may recall, was one of the early places where George Stephenson worked. And it's this railway that I want to look at some detail because there has recently been an excavation which revealed some interesting features. This is a LiDAR image of the area to the between the A69 bypass road and the Stamford Road, which is at the top. Now, the LiDAR image picks out rather well the form of the wagonway. But to assist your understanding, on the right-hand side is a diagram to illustrate the wagonway. And I want to focus in on Cut End Junction and the area at the centre bottom of the illustration, because this is where the excavation of the main engineering feature of this section of the wagonway, the Great Cut, was taken. But before we go on to that, I would point out the left-hand branch there, where the widow Grace Ainsley was the gatekeeper on the wagonway, and she gave George Stephenson his first job on the railway, looking after her cattle, which grazed the embankments of the wagonway. Now, looking at the civil engineering tasks in building this railway, the Dolly Pit is about a mile north of the Betty Pit, and the journey from the Dolly Pit down to the Betty Pit was a relatively easy downward incline of about 1 in 200 odd, which was really just what the railwaymen wanted, because the force of gravity took most of the weight of the wagon, and the horse simply kept the wagon on track. But once we get to the Betty Pit, to the crossing of the Ouseburn, which is marked by that square roughly in the centre of the slide near the junction, that section was mainly level. So again, not much of a problem. But once we get beyond the crossing of the Ouseburn down to the bottom of the slide, this presented the railway builders with major problems, because the section from the Ouseburn to the Cut End Junction was an uphill section of roughly 1 in 200 odd. And then the section from Cut End Junction to the summit of the hill that the A69 cuts through was a very difficult 1 in 31 uphill section, which for a horse pulling a 4.5 ton load was a difficult, if not impossible, task. And then the section after the A69 was a very steep descent down towards Newburn. So what the early engineers did was to lessen the incline by excavating a large cutting and using the the debris from the cutting to build embankments to the north to lessen the incline there. Now, it's this section where the excavation by Headland Archaeology took place in 218. And they revealed two things of real significance. One, they found the byway, which was not previously known of, and you can see that the byway was really a shallow depression in the crossing of the hill, and the reason why it was a shallow depression was that the byway was carrying, by and large, empty wagons returning to the colliery. On some occasions, the wagons would have had goods in them, such as timber or bricks for use at the colliery. But the overwhelming majority of the wagons were just empty. And the lightly engineered byway was sufficient for their purposes. But as we've seen, the cutting was an impossible incline for a single horse to encounter, and this needed a deep cutting to be excavated by the railway builders. Now, what was really interesting about this excavation was that they found two railways, not one railway. The first railway they found was a service railway which was used to distribute the spoil from the cutting to build the embankments to the north. And once the building had been completed, this was replaced with the main wagonway taking the coal down to Lemington. You can perhaps better understand the extent of this cutting by this slide, which is showing the sections that were involved in excavating the wagonway. But this excavation took place at the shallow end of the cutting, where the depth was round about 10 foot. But as you can perhaps appreciate, as the wagonway headed southwards, the cutting became deeper and deeper until it was in the region of 25 to 30 feet at its deepest end. Now, to give you some understanding of what that involved, if we have a look at a picture of the the London to Edinburgh non-stop train, the Elizabethan, passing through Heaton Junction, you'll see it's passing through a cutting, and if we attempt to cut that down to the size of what was at cut end, you'll see the size of the cutting at cut end and what a 30-foot cutting looked like. Now, in this review of the first wagonways, the first railways to Lemington, what I've tried to illustrate is that the Throckley wagonway was a very complex railway with a mainway, byway, switches, which we call points today, sidings, turn rails, wash pond. It was a complex railway and not just the simple wagonway. There were involved in the construction of this railway major civil engineering works, such as the large bridges at Walbottle, and the bridge across the Ousburn, the embankments and cuttings at Callerton, and the very large staiths at Lemington. I would point out this was a busy railway carrying about 80,000 tonnes of coal per annum. And if we try to calculate what this involved in the management of the railway, there was probably a train about every 7 minutes in the 12-hour period of daylight during the summer when the railway was in full operation. So this then was a major artery of the world's largest coalfield, and not just a simple branch line. And therefore, I would argue that the Throckley wagonway cannot be dismissed as an insignificant prelude to the real railways of the 19th century. And this idea of railways beginning with George Stephenson has to be questioned because for 200 years before that, there were major railways, which we call the wagonways of the Great Northern Coalfield, operating in our area. Much of what I've been saying and a great deal more is to be found in the publication available from the Common Room at the Neville Hall, the Mining Institute at Newcastle upon Tyne. So if you wish to follow this up, it's available in book form. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it enjoyable and informative.